Catus, Maximus here. I'm going to try something new for my channel and do a ratchet review. This happens to be a USA ratchet. No other markings. So you think, oh, I'm doing another video of a horrible ratchet in my futile attempts to make a video about every tool ever made. But something kind of stood out on me, that this wasn't like some weird Chinese knockoff tool or cheap tool, and was actually something that was really worth picking up. One is the chrome plating and the knurling. The knurling's actually pretty nice. Chrome plating actually seems pretty deep. You can really tell on this. Pretty well made. Looks like somebody put in a snap ring, because most of these New Britain style ratchets have a spiral retaining ring instead of a snap ring. They tend to have pretty loose anvils many times, although not all of them. I have a Mustang that has a pretty tight anvil. One of the traits of New Britain, never understood that, so I'm going to try to find a shim spring. What made me think it may have been something else worth picking up? We can see that the ball detent's actually pretty well staked in there. Really had like a nice sound. And really, there's a kind of a distinct sound between SK style rocking pawls and different and other types of ratchet pawl designs. But what really stood out is I kind of recognize this reverse lever. There's two different styles for New Britons. That would be ones like this, which also Proto has done, but they use standard swing pawls, and then there's this style. But when you check the reverse lever, it had the real distinctive where it's pretty stiff and it has a high over center operation. Really pretty definitive and stout reverse action. And I thought, you know, that really feels like a New Britain. And I've already opened it up, and sure enough it is. It's a 44 tooth. Let's get this snap ring out of here so you can see. That's a stiff snap ring. Pop that snap ring out, and voila, there's our New Britain ratchet design. We have our reverse lever, which is our switch, which is removable. We can actually see that somebody's been in here and actually greased this, or that may have been factory. Anyway, I like this ratchet. We can see inside the head, this one's pretty nice, has really nice deep cut teeth. And this is what makes the New Britain so famous. As a matter of fact, of all the New Britain ratchets or styles I've ever picked up, only two ever slipped or skipped. One was, and both happened to be Blackhawks. One was a 3/8 where it was just worn out. It had not been properly serviced, and then the teeth were half engaging and it wore out. And one was a 1/4 inch that I was able to restore to full operation. And what is really nice about the New Britain, as you can see here, is it has this floating paw. And when you're reversing it, it's actually switching the paw from one side to the other. Let me clean this up just a little bit. This is one kind of greasy unit here. And I do recommend just using a light oil instead of grease inside ratchets, because ratchets work in dirty environments and grease kind of wants to trap it just a little bit more. And if you're not using like a quality synthetic grease or something, they can end up hardening and then actually causing problems with the ratchet. But anyway, this is the famous New Britain design. It's like a kind of a floating wedge pawl, but in a round head ratchet instead of a pear head. Many pear head ratchets use what is essentially the same thing, a pawl that goes into a wedge. So the harder you press on it, the harder it presses out or pushes outward and sets the teeth. We can see that we just have a ton of teeth in here. It looks like this one is an 8 tooth. So lots of engagement. Really strong and reliable design. And so that was the whole purpose of this video, was seeing a ratchet that just literally said USA on it. And it turns out that it's a New Britain. And by not having a patent on it, this is either going to be one of two things. Either a very old New Britain, which I'm suspecting it's not before they had the patent because they put patent pending on it. I suspect this may have been made after the patents had already expired, and so they just decided to stop putting that on there. And it's also interesting because the number of ratchets so far: Husky, Pencraft, New Britain, Mac, Blackhawk, Mustang, and now this odd just USA only ratchet are all different brands that were made by New Britain. It's surprising. They were like masters of of making tools for other people. It's just really surprising how many different brands of ratchets use this one design, and it really is a good design. As far as I know, this design is not made anymore by anybody just because of the expense, because you have an E-clip in there, you have these 2 stamp pieces of sheet metal, some actually more complicated machining in the head, and so that's why I think nobody makes this style anymore. It's just because manufacturing-wise, it's too expensive. Good round head ratchets now use I sometimes call block and pawl, or their heart spring designs, which are okay, but they are just a lot cheaper to manufacture than something like this. The nice thing about these New Britons is they have pretty low back drag. So, as far as me removing the backlash, what I've done over the years is when I found sometimes at thrift stores they'll just old like cordless drills and stuff, they'll just sell for a couple bucks. So I periodically pick them up to take them apart because they use all these odd shim washers in the gearboxes. And I found a lot of use for them in exactly this situation, trying to shim up ratchets. So I guess the first thing I'm going to try here is this one, which is going to be a little bit thicker than this one here. I suspect this is probably going to be too thick. The problem with this one is it's interestingly enough, the diameter of this bore in here is 1 inch 80 thousandths, or 1080 or 1080 thousandths. The outside diameter of this ring is like 1082, 1083, and it's just a little bit too big. And what's unfortunate about that is if I do get it to pop in there, it may be impossible to remove. So I want to try this thicker one first, and if it's too thick, then I will be forced to attempt to use the other one here. Okay, so it turns out that that worked out. It's actually just a little bit tight. Oh, I do like to center my snap rings. I should probably do that. But that shim washer turned out to be... Oh, come on now. Let's center that just a little bit better. Kind of like to center my snap rings like that. Turns out this was just right, and so this is one of the nice things you can do, particularly with the New Britons. It's easier with ratchets that have internal snap rings rather than external ones where the anvil sticks beyond the body and then has a ring that goes around the outside of it. Because on this style, all you have to do is just find a washer, thin washer that will fit in the slightly larger than 1 inch bore and has a hole large enough to deal with the chamfer and radius that the anvil has. And so this is just a little bit too tight, but as this ratchet gets used, it will wear into being perfect. You know it's a little bit tight just because you feel not hard binding, but just a little bit of binding, say like right there. It's actually... And that lets you can also feel just a slight amount of unevenness. Otherwise, it reverses properly and works out pretty well. Surprisingly enough, that binding, it's a little bit in one spot. And so that's kind of the deal. Of course, you could take this washer and put a piece of sandpaper on a piece of glass where it's really flat and sand it down just a touch. I may add just a little bit of fluid here to kind of help it out. Let me do that. Anyway, that sums it up. It's a little bit tight, but I mean, it has a nice strong ball detent. Not ridiculous, but definitely pretty strong. And the little hump region will easily wear in if you actually put any real time on the ratchet. And it's one of the pleasures I kind of like doing. It's not just finding nice old ratchets like this, but being able to restore them. This is a little bit tight. I keep saying that. But the advantage to that is it'll break in, and that loose ratchet, that loose anvil, is now perfect. Absolutely. Just about, just a tiny bit of wobble. Just about dead tight. And I'm kind of understanding now, too, the way those pieces of sheet metal on the top of the mechanism have to swipe back and forth is probably one of the reasons why these do have loose tolerances, because if they're too tight, then those pieces of sheet metal will bind against each other and it won't reverse properly, which kind of makes sense, but it's not that bad. And just fiddling with it here for a few minutes, it's nowhere near as tight as it just was, because it's just a little hump region that needs to wear down. And now what I've ended up with is a pretty nice New Briton ratchet that now has just an absolutely, I mean, that's a for a round head, that would be a perfectly tight anvil. And I'm actually pretty stoked about it. So anyway, sorry for the super long video about a 3/8 ratchet. But I've had quite a few extra comments about, how to tighten up these anvils, and that's exactly what you have to do. You just have to really find the perfect washer to use in there. And when they have the spiral rings, you can replace them with snap rings, because snap rings tend to be just a little bit thicker, and they have a really thick undercut for the retaining ring, so that can remove a lot of the play too. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody who's been watching and subscribing, and if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.